The funeral flowers had barely wilted when the phone calls began. I was standing in my kitchen on a gray Tuesday morning, staring at a cup of tea that had gone cold long before I touched it. The walls seemed too quiet, the floor beneath me too heavy. Henry had been gone less than 3 weeks, and yet the house felt like it had aged by decades in his absence. Every creak, every shadow, carried a hollow sound. The phone rang. I hesitated, staring at the receiver as though answering it would mean letting the world in before I was ready. Finally, I picked up. Mother Thomas's voice was sharp, carrying the impatience I remembered from when he was a teenager asking for the car keys. "We need to talk about the house." I took a slow breath. "Good morning to you too, Thomas. Do not start with me," he said. "Rebecca and I have been talking. You cannot keep that place. It is too big for you, too much to manage." I gripped the edge of the counter. "There is no mortgage." A pause. Then came his laugh, quick and dismissive. "Mother, please. Dad's pension barely covers anything. We all know the strain you are under." I looked toward the garden through the window above the sink. The roses Henry and I had tended for so many years were in need of pruning. The herb patch was nothing but weeds. Once they had been our joy, now they were a reminder of absence. "Your concern is touching," I said. "Do not be dramatic," Thomas replied. "Rebecca agrees with me. She thinks it is time for you to move in with one of us." "Rebecca agrees," I repeated. My daughter had not called me since the funeral. She had not answered when I had reached out, and suddenly she agreed. "We had dinner last night," Thomas said. "As a family, we talked about your options." My options. Not my grief, not my life, not how to help me breathe again after 30 years of marriage. No, just my options, as though I were a puzzle they were eager to solve. I opened the refrigerator. It was still full of casseroles and pies from neighbors, meals I had not touched. "And these options," I asked, "do they include selling my home?" "It makes financial sense," he said. "You could help Rebecca and me. We have been looking at that townhouse near the park. And Rebecca has Emily's tuition to think of. This would be a win-win." The words sank like stones. A win-win. I closed the refrigerator harder than I needed to. "You know exactly what you meant, Thomas." The silence that followed was familiar. He was not ashamed. He was waiting for me to surrender. "What did you tell your sister?" I asked. "Just the truth," he said. "That Dad's pension is not enough, that you cannot keep the place up, that you are probably struggling more than you admit." The truth, as if he had bothered to ask. As if either of them had asked about Henry's careful investments, the accounts we had built together, or the small inheritance Henry had once tucked away. They did not ask. They assumed. And I let them. What they did not know was that hidden in Henry's desk drawer was a folder. Bank statements, investment portfolios, and a deed to a small house on the Amalfi Coast. Henry had shown me the photographs just months before his heart gave out. A white house on a hill, shutters open to the sea. A place for us to watch sunsets and drink wine, away from demands. I forced my voice steady. "I will think about it." "No," Thomas said. "We are not asking you to think. We are telling you what must happen." Rebecca already found a buyer. Her friend is in real estate. It will be a quick sale. Cash. Start packing your bags. I tightened my grip on the phone. "You found a buyer for my house. We are trying to help you, Mother. The sooner you accept this, the easier it will be for everyone." Transition. That was the word he used. As if grief was a business merger. As if 30 years of a life shared could be dissolved with a signature. "And where am I supposed to live during this transition?" I asked. "Rebecca has that finished basement. You will have your own entrance, your own bathroom. It will be perfect." Perfect. The same damp basement where I had once been asked to stay during a holiday visit because her house was too full upstairs. Perfect. "She is excited," Thomas insisted. "You can help with Emily, do some cooking. You know how Rebecca struggles with meals." Struggles. Rebecca always struggled with everything but expectation. "And what will you do in this arrangement?" I asked. "Lisa and I will handle the sale. The paperwork, the negotiations, we will make sure you get a fair price." Fair, I nearly laughed. Thomas's definition of fairness had always tilted in his favor. I said, "I need to think." "There is nothing to think about," he pressed. "The buyer wants to close within the month." 1 month. They were giving me 1 month to dismantle Henry's life, to erase our memories, to erase myself. I repeated slowly, "I need to think." "Fine," he said, "but do not take long. Good opportunities do not wait." The line went dead. I held the phone, listening to silence. Outside, a neighbor's car door slammed, a dog barked. Life went on. Mine was unraveling. I walked to Henry's study. I opened the desk drawer, the one he had used for years, and pulled out the folder. There they were. Statements that would make Thomas's eyes widen. The deed to the Italian house. Photographs of sunlit walls and sea views. "Let them think we are struggling," Henry had once said when Thomas asked for money. "It builds character." At the time, I thought he was cruel. Now I understood. It was protection. My phone buzzed, a message from Rebecca. Mother, Thomas told me about the house. This is for the best. Emily is excited about you living closer. Cannot wait to discuss. Emily, my granddaughter who used to call me every week during her first year at college, who learned to bake cookies in this very kitchen, who had not called me in months. I scrolled through my phone, searching. Nothing personal from her since Christmas. No updates, no simple hello, just silence. The realization was heavy. I was no longer a mother or grandmother in their eyes. I was a resource, a solution to their problems. I closed the folder. I went upstairs. I pulled down a suitcase from the top shelf of my closet. It was time to pack, not in the way Thomas imagined. The law office smelled of leather and polished wood. I sat across from Ms. Connolly, the estate lawyer Henry had trusted for years. She adjusted her glasses and spread the documents across her desk with a kind of reverence. Mrs. Whitmore, she said, your husband was very thorough. He left clear instructions. The house, the investments, and the Italian property are all under your sole control. The children were never named as beneficiaries, except for the life insurance policy. Everything else belongs entirely to you. I felt my chest loosen for the first time in weeks. They cannot sell the house without me, I said. Correct. Not without your signature. She pulled another envelope from her drawer. This was meant for you 1 month after his passing. Today is that day. I took the letter cream paper with Henry's handwriting, my name written carefully, almost lovingly. My hands trembled as I opened it. My dearest Helena, if you're reading this, I am gone. I know our children. I know they will circle, certain they know what is best for you. But they do not. You are not a burden to be managed. You are strong, capable, and wise. Do not let them convince you otherwise. The properties are yours. Do with them as you wish. Keep them, sell them, travel, right? Choose what brings you joy, not what others expect. You have given up your own dreams for decades. Now it is time to live for yourself. Go to Italy if you want. Watch sunsets for both of us. Live fully. With all my love, Henry. I read it twice, my vision blurred. His words filled the quiet office with his presence. For the first time since the funeral, I felt seen. There is one more thing, Ms. Connolly said. She handed me a bank card. Henry opened this account for you. He called it your independence fund. £50,000. He wanted you to have freedom. I closed my hand around the card. 50,000. A secret gift of possibility. When I left the office, the autumn air felt sharper, cleaner. The weight pressing on me since Henry's death began to lift. By the time I reached my car, my phone was buzzing again. Rebecca. Mother, I have been thinking about the basement. We can put in a small kitchenette. You will have your own little apartment. It will be cozy. I leaned against the car. Cozy, she called it, a basement. That sounds very thoughtful, I said. And do not worry about the cost, she continued. We can deduct it from the sale proceeds. Think of it as investing in your comfort. My comfort, not my independence, not my happiness. My comfort as though I were a dog being moved to a smaller pen. Rebecca, I asked, when was the last time you called just to ask how I was doing? A pause. What do you mean? I mean a call without an agenda. A call where you asked about my day, my plans, my feelings. Mother, that is not fair. I have been busy. Emily's tuition, my work, Emily's tuition. I closed my eyes. I have been sending Emily £500 every month for 2 years. 12,000 in total. The silence on the line was long and heavy. Rebecca finally whispered, that money helps, but it does not cover everything. Does she even know? I asked. Does Emily know it comes from me, not from some savings you scraped together? She knows you help, Rebecca said carefully. But she does not know the truth, I said. She thinks it is your sacrifice, not mine. I could hear her swallow. Mother, you are making this more complicated. No, I am finally seeing how simple it is. I ended the call and slid into the driver's seat. My hands were trembling, not from grief but from anger, cold, clean anger that sharpened everything into focus. At home, I went to Henry's desk. Behind a photo of us in Venice, I found the key he had mentioned in his letter, a small brass key with a tiny Italian flag on the keychain. I held it tightly, feeling the weight of choice in my palm. The next morning, Thomas's name flashed on my phone. His voice was clipped. Mother, we need your answer. Gregory's client is waiting. Do not ruin this for us. Ruin this for us. That was the truth. It was never about me. It was always about them. I deleted the message and turned to my laptop. It took me minutes to find the email of Signora Lucia, the neighbor Henry had mentioned who tended the Italian house. Dear Signora Lucia, my name is Helena Whitmore. I am Henry's widow. I understand you have been looking after our house. I plan to come to Italy soon. Please let me know what preparations are needed. With gratitude, Helena Whitmore. I pressed send before doubt could creep in. Then I pulled my suitcase from the closet. This time I packed for myself. The days that followed blurred into one another. Morning light fell across Henry's empty side of the bed, and I would wake with the familiar ache in my chest. The house echoed with silence. I moved through the rooms like a ghost, touching the armchair where he used to sit, the mug he favored for his morning coffee, the jacket still hanging by the door. Grief was heavy, but it was not the only weight pressing down on me. The phone calls grew more frequent. Thomas called every evening, his tone brisk, his words clipped. He spoke of deadlines and buyers as if my home were a piece of stock to be traded on the market. "Mother," he said, "you cannot drag this out. Gregory's client is ready to sign. You will be taken care of. All you need to do is agree." Agree, as though I were incapable of making a decision. I listened, rarely speaking. Silence became my shield. The less I gave, the more he revealed. His frustration bled through, his greed naked beneath the thin veil of concern. Rebecca, on the other hand, tried a different approach. Her calls dripped with sweetness, words wrapped in care but sharp underneath. "Mother, you must be so lonely in that big house," she would say. "Would it not be better to be surrounded by family? You could help with Emily, keep me company. We would cook together." She paused just long enough before adding, "And of course, with the sale, everyone benefits." Everyone, not me, not Henry's memory, everyone else. One afternoon she brought Emily with her. My granddaughter stood in the hallway, tall and restless, her phone clutched in her hand. She gave me a quick hug, her eyes already drifting back to the screen. "Hello, darling," I said, stroking her hair the way I used to when she was small. "Hi, Gran," she mumbled, then slipped into the living room, earbuds already in place. Rebecca followed me into the kitchen. She began rearranging the counters, opening cupboards, moving dishes. "This place is far too much for you," she said, shaking her head at the clutter she created herself. "When the house sells, you will thank us." "Thank you," I repeated softly. "Yes," she continued, ignoring my tone, "you will have less to worry about. You can focus on yourself, on myself." Yet every suggestion she made involved serving her needs. Cooking meals, watching Emily, helping with errands. I wanted to ask, when was the last time you came to sit with me in silence? When was the last time you asked about my pain, not your convenience? But I bit my tongue. Silence was power. Later that night, I stood by the window and watched the streetlights flicker. I thought about Henry's words in his letter. "You are strong, capable, and wise. Do not let them convince you otherwise." The next morning, Thomas appeared at my door unannounced. He strode in with his usual authority, papers tucked under his arm. "I am here to make this simple," he said, spreading documents across the dining table. "Sign here and here. The rest will be handled." I looked at the lines where he pointed, my name already printed beneath. "You went to the trouble of printing my name," I said. "Efficiency," he replied. "This way, you do not need to stress about the details." Stress. He mistook my silence for weakness. I sat down slowly, folding my hands in my lap. "And where do you see me living in your plan?" "With Rebecca. She has space. You will be comfortable." Comfortable. I thought of the damp basement, the smell of mildew, the small window half buried in soil. A basement where I would disappear while they divided what was mine. "And what about my independence?" I asked. Thomas leaned back, irritated. "Independence is overrated at your age. You need security, at my age." His words sliced deep, but I did not flinch. I let the silence stretch until he shifted in his chair. Finally, he pushed the pen toward me. "Sign, Mother. Stop making this harder than it needs to be." I rose from the table and walked to the window. The roses in the garden had wilted, petals scattered across the grass. I pressed my fingers against the cool glass, drawing strength from the silence. "You wanted my resources, not my presence," I whispered, not loud enough for him to hear. Behind me, Thomas sighed, gathering the papers. "We will talk again tomorrow." When the door closed, I locked it firmly. My decision was becoming clearer with every breath I took. The following evening, Rebecca arrived again, this time without warning. She carried a casserole dish in her arms, the kind neighbors had filled my fridge with after the funeral. She set it on the counter and looked around the kitchen as if taking inventory. "Mother, this is too much space for one person," she said, running her fingers along the cabinets. "It must feel like an empty museum." I leaned against the doorway, watching her as she opened drawers and cupboards with practiced familiarity. "You are right," I said. "It does feel empty." Her face softened, thinking I had yielded. "Then you see what I mean? Moving in with us will be better for everyone." Better for you, I thought, but I kept the words inside. Silence again, my shield. Rebecca sat at the table, smoothing her skirt. "Emily will love having you around. She has been struggling with her studies, you know. You could help her focus. She listens to you." I remembered the girl who used to curl up beside me with fairy tales, who whispered secrets she dared not tell her mother. the same girl now buried in her phone, distant as a stranger. Does Emily want me there? I asked. Rebecca hesitated. Of course she does. She is just busy. University life is demanding. She will come around once you are closer. I nodded but said nothing. The truth was already clear. After she left, I sat at the dining table and read Henry's letter again. His words steadied me. Do not let them convince you otherwise. The next morning, Thomas returned, this time with his wife, Lisa. She wore a sharp blazer and carried a folder, her smile rehearsed. Helena, she said warmly, we are only thinking of your best interests. The market is strong. Buyers like Gregory's client do not come along every day. She slid the folder across the table. Inside were glossy photos of a townhouse, a young family beaming on the front step. This is the buyer, she said. They are eager. They imagine their children playing in the garden. I closed the folder gently. And what about the children who did play in that garden? Mine. Lisa's smile faltered. That is sweet, but this is about the future. Thomas cleared his throat. Mother, let us be realistic. Sentimentality cannot pay bills. The house was paid off. They knew nothing of Henry's careful planning, and I would not enlighten them. I rose from the table. I appreciate your efforts, but I will not decide today. Lisa pressed her lips together. Helena, opportunities like this do not last. Then it will pass, I said, and walked into the living room. Behind me, I heard Thomas mutter in frustration. They gathered their things and left without a goodbye. That night the phone rang again. Rebecca's voice was sharp, stripped of the sweetness she had tried before. Mother, Thomas told me you refused to sign. Why are you being so difficult? This is not just about you. No, I said quietly, it never is, her breath caught. What does that mean? It means that you and your brother want my house, not my presence. The silence that followed was so deep I could hear my own heartbeat. Rebecca finally said, you are twisting this. We are trying to take care of you. By erasing me, I whispered. I ended the call before she could reply. I sat in the living room long after, the shadows lengthening across the walls. The silence was thick, but it was not empty. It was mine. In that silence, I began to see the shape of my decision. In the morning, I gathered boxes and began to sort through the attic. I packed toys, photographs, school projects, remnants of their childhood. I stacked the boxes neatly by the door. These belong to them, not me. If they want the past, they can carry it with them. For myself, I kept Henry's letters, his watch, and the folder with the Italian deed. The rest no longer bound me. When the doorbell rang again, I did not answer. I let the knocking fade into silence. By the end of the week, the house looked less like a museum of memories and more like a shell ready to be left behind. I stood at the window, watching the last light fall over the garden. The roses glowed faintly in the dusk, fragile but still alive. I whispered into the quiet, I am not yours to manage. I am mine. And for the first time in weeks, I believed it. The night stretched long and sleepless. I sat in Henry's study, the small lamp casting a pool of light across the desk. The house was silent except for the ticking clock on the wall. My fingers brushed over the drawer handles, lingering on the one Henry always kept locked. For years, I had respected his privacy, trusting his quiet organization. Now I searched for answers. I remembered the brass key he had left me, tucked into the envelope with his letter. I retrieved it from my nightstand, the tiny Italian flag dangling from its chain. My hands shook as I slid it into the lock. The drawer opened with a soft click. Inside was a leather folder, worn at the corners, filled with documents carefully stacked. Bank statements, investment records, deeds. My breath caught when I pulled out the title deed written in Italian. At the top was the address of a small house on the Amalfi Coast. I traced the words slowly, translating the familiar terms. Proprietor, Henry and Helena Whitmore. Date of purchase, 3 years ago. While we were still dreaming of retirement, while he was telling me about sunsets and vineyards, he had already made it real. Beneath the deed was a set of photographs. The house was simple, whitewashed walls climbing with bougainvillea, green shutters flung open toward the sea. The horizon stretched wide and blue, endless waves crashing against the cliffs below. In one picture, the evening light bathed the terrace in gold. My throat tightened. He had planned this for us. He had given me a place to breathe, a place to live when the world became too heavy. At the bottom of the folder was another envelope. I opened it and pulled out a single sheet of Henry's handwriting. Helena, I know you worry. I know our children will one day see you as fragile, but you are not. You are stronger than you believe. This house in Italy is not just bricks and stone. It is freedom. It is your sanctuary. If ever you feel trapped, go there, live there. The account I created will cover everything. I want you to see the sea each morning and remember that you are not alone. I will be there in every wave, every sunset. Do not let anyone convince you otherwise. Love always, Henry. Tears blurred the page. I pressed the letter to my chest, closing my eyes. His voice echoed through the silence, steady and reassuring. When I lifted my head, I noticed a small envelope at the very back of the drawer. Inside was a bank card, the same one Ms. Connolly had mentioned. I turned it over in my hands, reading the name, Helena Whitmore, Independence Fund. His words came back to me, the way he used to smile when I fretted over bills. You do not need to worry, Helena. I have it handled. I sat there for a long time, staring at the photographs of the Italian house. My heart ached with longing, to sit on that terrace, to hear the sea, to breathe again. The next day I called the number written on a notepaper clipped to the deed. The line rang twice before a woman's voice answered, warm and lilting. Pronto, this is Lucia. I swallowed, clutching the phone tighter. Signora Lucia, my name is Helena Whitmore. I am Henry's wife. Ah, la signora, she exclaimed, her voice lifting with recognition. I am so sorry for your loss. Henry was a kind man. I tended the house when he could not come. It is safe. The shutters are strong, the garden still blooms. I closed my eyes, a wave of relief washing over me. Thank you, I whispered. When will you come, she asked. The house waits for you. Soon, I said, I hope soon. After the call ended, I sat with the phone in my lap, staring at the carpet. The decision was already shaping itself in my mind. I would go, not out of spite, not as punishment, but because Henry had given me the gift of choice. And because silence, the shield I had carried, could now open into something greater, freedom. That evening, when Thomas called again, I let it ring. I did not answer Rebecca's messages either. I carried the folder upstairs instead, laying the photographs on the bed. The sea glimmered back at me, alive even through glossy paper. I whispered into the quiet, Henry, I will go. I will find our sunsets. The folder stayed on my nightstand like a secret flame, glowing quietly in the dark. I would open it every evening, spreading the photographs across the quilt, memorizing each corner of that Italian house. The walls, the terrace, the sea that seemed to breathe with promise. I traced the handwriting of Henry's letter until I knew every curve of every word. Meanwhile, the calls from my children continued. Thomas left voicemails filled with irritation. Mother, we cannot drag this out. You are being unreasonable. Gregory's client is still waiting, but he will not wait forever. Rebecca tried her softer approach, leaving long messages filled with sighs. Mother, please, we are worried about you. It is not good for you to be rattling around in that house alone. Think of Emily. She misses you, she needs you. But when I looked through my phone, I saw no missed calls from Emily. No messages, no notes of affection, only silence. I sat in the kitchen one morning, the light spilling across the table, and I realized that their words no longer stung. They floated past me, meaningless, while my gaze rested on the photographs of Italy. I began to prepare quietly. I sorted through closets, placing my own belongings in neat piles while boxing up what belonged to Thomas and Rebecca. Childhood toys, yearbooks, awards, all the trophies of their youth I had cherished. I labeled each box carefully with their names. Let them take their past. I would take my future. In the evenings, I made lists. Clothes for warm weather, my passport, Henry's letters, the bank card. I practiced saying Italian phrases under my breath, awkward at first, then smoother. Buongiorno, grazie, la casa è grave mia. At night, when the air was still, I imagined myself sitting on that terrace. The sound of the sea, a glass of wine, the knowledge that I had stepped out of their grip. The day Thomas came pounding on the door, I did not answer. He rang the bell, his shadow moving behind the frosted glass. Mother, open up. We need to settle this. I stood at the top of the stairs, holding Henry's folder against my chest, and remained silent. Eventually, his footsteps retreated. Later that night, I sat by the window and whispered, sometimes silence is the greatest shield we have. Henry had been right. By saying nothing, I was allowing them to reveal themselves. Every call, every demand, every sigh, they were unmasking their own hunger. I did not need to expose them. They exposed themselves. The next morning, I booked a flight. One way. London to Naples. The confirmation email blinked on the screen, solid and undeniable. I closed the laptop and pressed my hand against Henry's photograph on the wall. You have given me a map, I whispered. I will follow it. Rebecca called again that afternoon, her voice shrill on the voicemail. Mother, Thomas said you are ignoring him. What is going on with you? We are trying to help, and you are shutting us out. I deleted the message without listening to the rest. Then I returned to the suitcase on my bed. I folded my clothes slowly, deliberately. Each shirt, each scarf, each pair of shoes chosen not for survival but for living, for mornings in the sun, for evenings by the sea. When I zipped the suitcase closed, the sound was final. I was ready. I looked around the bedroom one last time. The wallpaper Henry had chosen, the worn rug, the photograph of our wedding day. The house no longer held me captive. It was simply a place I had lived. I whispered into the quiet, "I will carry you with me, Henry, but the rest I leave behind." And for the first time, I felt light. The days grew sharper as autumn deepened. The air outside smelled of damp leaves, and every gust rattled the windows as though urging me forward. Inside, my house stood stripped of clutter. Boxes for Thomas and Rebecca lined the hallway like silent witnesses. My own belongings had been pared down to a single suitcase in the bedroom. I moved through the rooms with deliberate quiet, rehearsing what it felt like to let go. The silence was not empty anymore. It was mine. It was a shield, and it was growing stronger. When the phone rang, I let it ring. I no longer rushed to answer, no longer felt the sting of their impatience. Each unanswered call was a small act of defiance, a reminder that I was not obligated to be at their disposal. One evening, Thomas arrived again. I saw his car pull up, the headlights sweeping across the curtains. He came to the door and knocked hard, his shadow looming. "Mother," he shouted, "we know you are in there, stop this nonsense." I stood in the hallway, only a few steps from the door, listening. My heart thudded, but I stayed still. "Open the door," he said, his fist striking the wood. "Do not make me come back with the papers." The silence stretched. He knocked again, then cursed under his breath. Finally, the sound of retreating footsteps, the slam of his car door, the engine fading into the night. I pressed my back against the wall and closed my eyes. The silence had protected me. I had said nothing, yet the message was louder than any argument: I will not be bullied. The next morning, Rebecca called. Her voice, when it reached my voicemail, was heavy with accusation. "Mother, this is not fair. You are pushing us away. Thomas is trying to do what is best, and you are making him out to be the villain. We only want security for you. You should be grateful." Grateful. The word rang bitter in my ears. Later that afternoon, I sat at the dining table with Henry's letter open in front of me. "You are stronger than you believe. Do not let them convince you otherwise." His handwriting was steady, certain, as though he had known exactly what I would face. The silence in the house wrapped around me, warm, protective. I realized that in choosing not to argue, not to explain, I was taking back my power. They could not twist my words if I gave them none. They could not trap me in their demands if I refused to respond. "Sometimes silence is the greatest shield we have," I whispered, the words filling the stillness. That night, I packed away the last of Henry's jackets, folded with care. I left one suit hanging in the wardrobe, the one he had worn on our anniversary. It felt right to let it remain, like a marker of the life we had lived. When the doorbell rang again, I did not move. I sat in the living room, hands folded in my lap, letting the bell echo unanswered. Eventually, the ringing stopped. The silence remained, and it was enough. The pressure did not stop. If anything, it thickened like storm clouds, yet I discovered that silence could bend the storm away from me. Every time the phone rang, I stared at the screen until it faded to stillness. Every knock at the door passed unanswered. The less I engaged, the louder they revealed themselves. One morning, I found an envelope pushed through the letterbox. Inside was a contract prepared by Thomas's lawyer friend. A note in Thomas's handwriting said, "All you need to do is sign. We will handle the rest. Love, Thomas." I folded the papers neatly, tied them with string, and set them on the kitchen counter. I would not tear them nor throw them away. They could sit there untouched, my silence heavier than any rejection. Rebecca tried again, this time sending Emily to my door. My granddaughter stood there, awkward in her coat, her phone glowing in her hand. "Gran," she said softly, "Mum asked me to talk to you." I opened the door wide but did not invite her in. I wanted to see her face, not the shadow of her mother behind her words. "What did she ask you to say?" I asked. Emily hesitated, her eyes flickering down to her phone. "Just that it would be easier if you came to stay with us, that you are all alone here." Alone. I studied her, remembering the child who once clutched my hand during thunderstorms, who begged for bedtime stories. "Do you miss me?" I asked quietly. Her mouth opened, then closed. She shifted on her feet. "Gran, I am busy, I have exams, you know how it is." I nodded slowly. "I understand." The silence stretched between us. She fidgeted, glancing back at the car where Rebecca waited. At last, she muttered I should go. I watched her walk away, my heart aching, but I did not call after her. I let silence speak for me. That evening, I lit a single candle in Henry's study. I read his letter again, the ink now nearly memorized. I thought about the Italian sea, about the terrace that waited. My silence was not weakness. It was a decision. Every unspoken word was a step toward freedom. When Thomas called again, his voice harsh on the voicemail, I listened only once. "Mother, this is childish. You are forcing our hand. If you do not cooperate, we will move forward without you. I smiled faintly. Without me, they could do nothing. The house was mine. The silence I had given them was a wall they could not climb. The next day, I took the contract from the counter and slipped it back into the envelope. On the outside, I wrote in steady letters, "Return to sender." Then I set it by the door, ready for the post. As I sealed the envelope, a calmness spread through me. I had not argued, not screamed, not begged. I had simply withheld. And in withholding, I had claimed my strength. That night, lying in bed, I whispered into the dark, "This is not punishment. This is awakening." The silence answered back, steady as my own heartbeat. The first snow fell quietly, dusting the garden in white. I stood at the window, watching flakes drift onto the bare branches, and felt something shift inside me. Winter had always made me think of endings, but that morning it felt like a beginning. I had packed my suitcase already, tucked neatly by the bedroom door. Each item folded with purpose, not haste. I moved through the house slowly, touching the banister, the framed photographs, the table where Henry and I had shared meals. Every corner carried a memory, but none of them chained me anymore. The doorbell rang. I knew before I looked who it was. Thomas stepped inside without waiting for permission, his coat dusted with snow. He carried a folder thick with papers, his jaw tight. Rebecca followed a moment later, her perfume sharp, her smile brittle. "Mother," Thomas said, setting the folder on the table. "This cannot go on. We need a decision today." I sat at the head of the table, folding my hands, the silence stretched, my heart steady. Thomas opened the folder and pushed a pen toward me. "Sign here. The buyer is ready. We can close before the new year." Rebecca leaned closer. "Think of how much easier life will be once this is settled. No more empty rooms, no more maintenance. You can be with us where you belong." I looked at the pen lying across the page, my name already typed beneath the lines. Then I looked at their faces, so eager, so expectant. "You wanted my resources, not my presence," I said softly. The words hung in the air, sharper than any shout. Thomas blinked, caught off guard. Rebecca flushed, her smile faltering. "Mother, that is not," Thomas began, but I raised a hand and the silence fell again. I rose slowly from the table and walked to the hallway. From the closet, I pulled out the boxes I had prepared, each one neatly labeled with their names, filled with the artifacts of their childhood. I carried them to the dining room and set them at their feet. "These are yours," I said. "Your toys, your school projects, your memories. Take them with you." Rebecca stared at the boxes as though I had placed stones before her. Thomas's mouth tightened, but he said nothing. I turned back to the table and closed the folder of contracts. I slid it back across the table toward Thomas. "I will not sign." The room grew thick with silence. "You cannot keep this house forever," he said finally, his voice rising. "You are being selfish." "Selfish," I repeated, my voice calm. "I gave you everything for decades. My time, my energy, my support. And still, it was never enough." Rebecca tried to interject, her voice pleading. "Mother, please," I shook my head. "No more." I walked to the front door, opened it wide, and stood aside. The cold air swept in, sharp and clean. "Take the boxes," I said. "Leave the papers." Thomas's jaw clenched. He gathered the folders, but he left the contracts behind. Rebecca picked up one of the boxes, tears pricking her eyes. I closed the door behind them, the click of the lock final. For a moment I leaned against the wood, trembling with the force of what I had done. But underneath the tremor was strength, rising steady. I turned, lifted my suitcase, and carried it to the hallway. The cab would arrive soon. The ticket to Naples sat in my coat pocket, Henry's letter folded beside it. I whispered into the quiet house, "This is not the end. This is the beginning." The silence answered, warm and steady. The cab pulled up just as the snow began to thicken. Its headlights washed across the garden, turning the frost into tiny stars. I lifted my suitcase and walked down the path, every step lighter than the last. The roses were buried beneath the snow, but I paused to touch the gate, remembering Henry's hands guiding mine when we planted them. Then I turned away without regret. The driver opened the trunk. "Airport, ma'am?" "Yes," I said, my voice steady. "Heathrow." Inside the cab, the warmth of the heater fogged the windows. As we drove away, I did not look back. The house shrank in the rearview mirror until it disappeared. My chest ached, but it was not grief this time. It was release. At the airport, I moved through the crowds like a shadow among strangers. Families bustled past, couples whispered, children clutched toys. Everyone seemed to be heading toward something. For the first time in years, so was I when the boarding call echoed. I touched the letter in my coat pocket. Henry's words rested there like a compass. I walked down the jet bridge, each step a declaration. I choose this. The plane lifted off into the night sky, the city lights fading below. I pressed my forehead to the window and whispered, "Henry, I am on my way." Hours later, the plane descended over the Bay of Naples. Dawn painted the horizon in streaks of gold and pink. The sea glittered beneath, vast and endless, just as Henry had described. My heart swelled, my throat tightening with tears. At the arrival's gate, a woman held a sign with my name. Her smile was warm, her eyes kind. "Signora Whitmore, I am Lucia." Her voice carried the music of the Italian coast. She clasped my hands as though we were old friends. "Welcome home," she said. The drive along the Amalfi Cliffs was dizzying, the sea crashing far below, the sky so wide it seemed to swallow me whole. The car wound through narrow streets, past terraced vineyards and whitewashed houses climbing the hillsides, and then I saw it. The house stood on a rise, shutters open to the sun, bougainvillea tumbling in red and purple across the walls. The terrace stretched wide, waiting. I stepped out of the car, the salty air rushing over me, filling my lungs. The sound of the sea was louder here, alive and endless. Lucia touched my arm. "He loved this place. He told me it was for you." I walked slowly to the terrace, my footsteps sure. I set my suitcase down and stood at the edge, the horizon blazing with light. For the first time since Henry's death, I felt him near, not as a memory, but as presence in the waves, the air, the sun on my face. "This is not punishment," I whispered into the wind. "This is awakening." The sea roared back as if in answer, and I knew my life was no longer theirs to dictate. It was mine to live. The first morning in Amalfi broke with a light so clear it felt as though the world had been washed clean. I woke to the sound of waves crashing below the cliffs, their rhythm steady and ancient. The shutters of the bedroom window were half open, letting in the smell of salt and citrus. I sat up slowly, the sheets cool against my skin, and for a moment I had to remind myself, this is mine. I stepped out onto the terrace barefoot. The tiles were cold beneath my feet, but the sun warmed my shoulders. From here, the Mediterranean stretched endlessly, shifting blues and silvers under the rising light. Boats dotted the water, their white sails like brushstrokes on a painting. "Buongiorno, signora," a voice called from the garden below. I leaned over the stone railing. Lucia stood among the olive trees, a basket on her arm, her scarf tied tightly against the morning breeze. Her smile reached her eyes. "Buongiorno," I answered, my voice unsteady with the weight of both gratitude and disbelief. She beckoned. "Come, I have breakfast for you." I made my way down the steps carved into the hillside. The air was rich with the scent of rosemary and lemons hanging from branches heavy with fruit. When I reached her, Lucia held out the basket, warm bread, ripe figs, a small jar of honey. "This was Henry's favorite," she said softly. "He always asked me to keep the garden alive for you. He wanted it to feel ready when you came." Her words sank deep into me. I held the basket close, blinking back tears. Inside her kitchen, the walls were painted a pale yellow, sunlight spilling across the wooden table. She poured me strong coffee, its aroma filling the room. "You will need to learn our ways," she said, stirring her cup. "The market in the piazza on Saturdays, the fishermen arrive at dawn. The church bells ring whenever there is news, and everyone will know you by name before the week is over." I laughed softly, the sound surprising me. "I am not sure I am ready to be known." Lucia tilted her head. "You are ready to live." The simplicity of her words disarmed me. I nodded, taking a bite of bread dipped in honey. The sweetness filled my mouth, rich and new. After breakfast, she walked me through the narrow streets of Amalfi. The houses leaned together, their balconies overflowing with flowers. Children ran barefoot along the cobblestones, laughter echoing. Shopkeepers stood in their doorways, calling greetings in Italian that I returned with awkward smiles and stammered phrases. Lucia introduced me at the bakery, the fruit stall, the tiny church whose doors were always open. At each place, someone touched my arm, looked into my eyes, and said, "Benvenuta," welcome. By the time we returned to the house, my cheeks ached from smiling. The silence here was not empty, it was full of life. That evening, I stood again on the terrace. The sun sank low, painting the sky with streaks of orange and violet. I poured a glass of wine, holding it high toward the horizon. "For us, Henry," I whispered. "For the life you wanted me to have." The waves crashed below, answering in their eternal language, and for the first time, I did not feel like a widow surviving. I felt like a woman beginning. The days in Amalfi began to shape themselves around rhythm and light. Mornings were filled with the voices of fishermen calling from the harbor, afternoons with the hum of cicadas, and evenings with the slow descent of the sun into the sea. Life here moved differently. Time was not chased, it unfolded. I started each day on the terrace with coffee strong enough to steady me, watching the waves crash far below. The silence I once carried as armor now opened into something gentler. It was no longer the absence of noise but the presence of peace. Lucia became my compass in this new world. She showed me how to bargain at the Saturday market, teaching me to point to the best tomatoes and say questi, per favor. She walked me to the church square where neighbors gathered in the evenings, men playing cards, women trading stories, children darting around the fountain. I listened more than I spoke, letting their laughter wash over me. One afternoon, she placed a hand on my arm as we walked. "You are different from the woman who arrived last week," she said. "Different how?" "Your shoulders are lighter. You look at the sea as if you finally belong to it." I smiled. "Maybe I do." In the quiet hours, I began writing. At first only small lines in a notebook, pieces of memory, the scent of Henry's jacket, the creak of the stairs in our old house, the words Thomas had thrown like stones. But the more I wrote, the more space opened inside me. The page absorbed what I could not say aloud. I noticed, too, how my body began to change. My steps grew steadier on the steep cobblestone streets. My breath came easier in the salty air. At night I slept deeply, no longer haunted by the pressure of expectation. One evening, as Lucia and I sat together with glasses of limoncello, she asked, "Do you miss them, your children?" The question hung in the warm air. I thought of Thomas's clipped voice, Rebecca's brittle smile, Emily's eyes fixed on her phone. I thought of the boxes I had left for them, each filled with the pieces of a past they valued more than my presence. "I miss who they used to be," I said slowly, "but I do not miss how they made me feel." Lucia nodded, her expression soft. "Sometimes family is given by blood. Other times, family is chosen by the heart. You will find both here." Her words lingered long after she left that night. Standing on the terrace, I realized she was right. I was not alone. The house, the garden, the sea, and the kindness of strangers, these were family too. When the church bells rang out across the valley, I felt Henry beside me, not as a ghost, but as a quiet strength woven into every wave. "This is not punishment," I whispered again, raising my glass to the horizon. "This is awakening." The sea answered, eternal and alive, and I knew with certainty that I had stepped into the life Henry wanted for me, and the life I now claimed for myself. The letter from Emily arrived 2 weeks after I settled into the rhythm of a Malfi life. It was handwritten, a rarity in her world, and the sight of her familiar scrawl made my hands tremble. "Dear Gran, I found out the truth. Mum told me the money for my tuition came from you, not her. I feel ashamed I didn't ask sooner. I should have known. I don't know why she hid it from me. I want to see you. I don't care what Mum or Uncle Thomas say. Please tell me if I can come." I read the letter 3 times, tears slipping down my cheeks. The silence I had chosen had forced truths to the surface. Emily's voice, honest and trembling on the page, broke through in a way her mother's never could. That evening, I sat at my desk and wrote back. "My dearest Emily, of course you may come. This house was meant to be a place of peace, and there is always space for you. Come when your heart is ready, not when anyone else tells you. Here you will not be judged, only loved. All my love, Gran." I sealed the envelope and walked it down to the post box near the church, the sea air lifting the weight from my shoulders. Weeks later, she arrived. I stood at the small Amalfi station, the sun beating down, my palms damp with nerves. When she stepped off the bus, dragging a suitcase, I barely recognized her. Taller, sharper around the edges, yet still carrying the same uncertain tilt to her smile. "Gran," she said softly, and then she was in my arms, clinging to me like the little girl who once feared thunderstorms. We walked together through the winding streets, past the bakery and the fruit stall. She gazed at the painted tiles, the cascading flowers, the narrow alleys filled with light. "It's beautiful here," she whispered. "Yes," I said. "It saved me." At the house, she dropped her suitcase in the hall and stepped onto the terrace. Her breath caught as she looked out at the sea. "Gran. How could Mum not tell me about this?" I touched her shoulder gently. "Some truths are hidden because people fear what they reveal, but you deserve honesty." She turned to me, eyes shining. "Thank you for everything, for paying my tuition, for being here." That evening we cooked together, clumsy and laughing in the kitchen. She chopped tomatoes while I stirred the sauce, the air rich with garlic and basil. It felt like years had fallen away. As we ate on the terrace, the sunset washing the sky in gold, Emily leaned back in her chair. "I don't want to go back," she said. "Not yet." "You don't have to," I answered. "Stay as long as you like." The sea roared below us, steady and alive as though approving the promise. The days with Emily became a rhythm of their own, woven into the life I had begun here. We rose late, drank coffee on the terrace, and wandered the markets together. She was awkward at first, her phone still glued to her hand, but slowly Amalfi loosened her grip on that world. She began to laugh more, to linger over conversations, to watch the sea with me in silence. One afternoon, we sat on the steps of the piazza eating gelato, the bells of the church chiming above us. Emily turned to me suddenly, her eyes serious. "Gran, why didn't you tell me sooner? About the money, about this house." I studied her face, the vulnerability there. "Because I wanted you to live freely, without guilt. Sometimes love works better when it is quiet, when it does not demand recognition." Her eyes filled with tears. "Mum made it seem like it was her sacrifice. I trusted her, and I ignored you." I reached for her hand. "You were young. It is not your burden to carry your mother's choices. What matters is that you see the truth now." She nodded, her grip tightening around mine. That night on the terrace, Emily watched the horizon as the sun melted into the water. "Gran," she said, "when you told them no, when you didn't sign, weren't you scared?" I thought about the silence I had wielded, the pressure pressing in from all sides. "Yes," I admitted, "but sometimes silence is stronger than shouting. Sometimes not giving an answer is the answer." She let the words settle, then whispered, "I want that kind of strength." "You already have it," I told her. "You came here against their wishes. You listened to your own voice. That is the beginning." The following days deepened our bond. We cooked, we swam in the sea, we visited Lucia, who welcomed Emily as if she were her own. Emily asked about Henry, and I told her stories she had never heard, the way he whistled while pruning roses, how he once burned a stew but insisted we eat it anyway. She laughed until tears rolled down her cheeks. One evening, she admitted quietly, "Sometimes I felt like Mum saw me as a trophy, not as a person. But with you, I feel real." I brushed her hair from her face. "That is because love, true love, is not about possession. It is about presence." Her eyes glistened. "Then I want to stay longer, Gran, maybe even study here, in Italy." The words took my breath away. I saw in her the same awakening Henry had wanted for me: freedom, selfhood, a life chosen rather than imposed. "Then stay," I said, my voice steady. "This place has room for both of us. The sea is wide enough to hold all our beginnings." As the church bells echoed through the valley and the stars lit the sky above us, I realized something profound. The love I thought had been fractured forever had returned in a new shape, stronger, truer, untainted by greed. Emily was not just my granddaughter. She was proof that the future could be different. The days grew longer as spring settled over Amalfi. The lemon trees glowed with blossoms, their fragrance drifting across the terrace. Emily had taken to studying at the table outside, her notebooks spread wide, her pen scratching in steady rhythm. Watching her filled me with a quiet pride I had not felt in years. One evening, as we prepared supper together, the phone rang. I glanced at the screen. It was Thomas. Emily froze. "Are you going to answer?" I shook my head and let it ring until the sound disappeared into silence. A moment later, it rang again. This time, Rebecca's name appeared. Emily whispered, "Maybe you should pick up just to end it." I looked at her, then pressed the button. Rebecca's voice burst through, tight and trembling. "Mother, please, we need to talk. Thomas is furious, but I can't do this anymore. We miss you." "Emily, she's here with me," I said calmly, a sharp inhale. "What, she's in Italy without telling me? She is safe. She is studying, she is alive, and she is happy." Rebecca's voice cracked. "Mother, we were wrong. We pushed too hard. We saw only what we wanted. Please, don't shut us out forever." I closed my eyes, breathing in the scent of garlic and basil from the pan. "This isn't punishment, Rebecca. This is awakening. I had to choose freedom because otherwise I would have been erased. If you want to be in my life, it cannot be on those terms again." Silence filled the line, then a faint whisper. "I don't know if Thomas will ever understand, but I do. At least I am beginning to." When the call ended, Emily slid her hand into mine. "Gran, you were incredible. You didn't yell, you didn't beg, you just told the truth." "Truth doesn't need to shout," I said softly. "It only needs to stand." The following weeks brought small changes. Rebecca began sending tentative emails, nothing demanding, only simple notes. "How are you? How is Emily?" I replied when I wished, no longer out of obligation but out of choice. Thomas remained silent, his pride too sharp, but I no longer felt pierced by it. Instead, my days filled with color. I planted herbs in the garden, kneeling in the soil under the warm Italian sun. I joined Lucia in the piazza, laughing over stories I only half understood. I even began writing in earnest, filling page after page with memories, reflections, and the beginnings of a story that was no longer about grief but about becoming. One afternoon, Emily came racing up the hill from the university, her hair flying in the breeze. She held out a letter. "Gran, they accepted me. I can transfer here. I can stay." I hugged her tightly, the joy almost too much to contain. "That's what Henry wanted," I whispered. "Not just for me, but for you too. A life of choice, a life of freedom." That evening we celebrated with Lucia. She brought bottles of wine, and we sat under the string of lights she had hung across the terrace. The sea glimmered in the moonlight, the air alive with music from the square below. As Emily raised her glass, her voice steady and sure, she said, "To new beginnings." I lifted mine, meeting her eyes. "To awakening." The clink of glasses rang out into the night, carried away by the sea breeze, and I knew that the life Henry had dreamed for me had become something even greater. It was no longer just mine, it was ours. The summer sun deepened into gold, spilling across the terraces and the narrow streets of Amalfi. I no longer felt like a visitor here. My steps were sure on the cobblestones, my mornings filled with routine and joy. Each day I carried my notebook to the cafe by the harbor, where I wrote while the fishermen unloaded their nets. The words came freely, as though silence had finally opened the door to everything I had suppressed for years. Emily thrived beside me. She began classes at the university in Naples, traveling back and forth on the bus with ease. At night she shared her lessons with me, speaking of art, history, and language. Her eyes sparkled with purpose. She was no longer the distracted girl glued to her phone. She was alive, becoming someone of her own making. One evening, as we watched the horizon burn orange with sunset, she asked, "Gran, do you ever think you'll forgive them? Mum, Uncle Thomas?" I took a long breath. The sea whispered against the cliffs. "Forgiveness is not a gift for them. It is a freedom for me. I already let go of the anger. That doesn't mean I will allow them to hurt me again. Boundaries are love too, love for myself." Emily nodded, her hand resting over mine. "I understand, and I'm proud of you." Not long after, a letter arrived from Rebecca. It was longer this time, unpolished, and filled with more honesty than I had ever seen from her. "Mother, I realize now how blind I was. I saw you as someone to lean on, not as a woman who had given her life for us. I am sorry. If you are willing, I would like to come and see you. Not to take anything from you, just to be with you. Yours, Rebecca." I read the letter twice, then set it aside. I did not rush to respond. I had learned the value of silence, of choosing when to speak. Days later, I wrote back simply, "Rebecca, you may come when you are ready to see me as I am, not as what you want me to be. Until then, I wish you peace." The act of writing it, of setting that boundary, felt like closing a circle. That night, I walked down to the beach alone. The waves curled at my feet, cool and insistent. I looked up at the stars glittering above the Mediterranean, and for the first time in my life, I felt no weight pressing me down. "This isn't punishment," I whispered to the waves. "This is awakening." The water roared back, endless and sure, as if Henry himself had answered. When I returned to the house, Emily was waiting on the terrace, a lantern glowing beside her. She looked at me with the same wonder I once reserved for her. "Gran," she said softly, "you've changed. You're not just surviving anymore, you're living." I smiled, brushing her hair from her face. "So are you?" We sat together in silence, watching the lights of fishing boats flicker across the horizon. The sea stretched wide before us, infinite and full of promise. For the first time in decades, the future did not frighten me. It called to me. And I knew, without doubt, that this was the life Henry had wanted me to claim. My life, my choice, my awakening.